child. Welcome to this volume of our video book, The Way to Cook Soups, Salads, and Bread. Here's the table of contents. Notice that each recipe has a reference number which will appear in the upper right-hand corner. This will make it possible for you to know exactly where you are moment by moment. Furthermore, these numbers correspond to the recipe numbers in the booklet that accompanies this tape. Let's begin. Here's a very easy soup to prepare. It tastes good, it smells wonderful, and as a matter of fact, it's been nourishing generations of Frenchmen. And if someone said to me, "What's your favorite soup?" I'd say, leek and potato. The leeks have a very special perfume all their own. If you can't get them, you can use onions or use part onions, part leek. And when you get your leeks, there's a little bit of green that you leave on, which is tender, and be sure to wash them thoroughly, and then cut them in half lengthwise, and you just cut them simply like this. And you want about 3 cups of leeks and or onions, and in they go to a pot, and potatoes, and just chunk them up rather nicely that way. And I've kept them in water so that they won't discolor, and they go into the pot. I've got about 3 cups of each there. And then for the liquid, this may surprise you, but it's just going to have plain water. And the reason for that is you don't want anything to interfere with the lovely, fresh taste of these vegetables. Now, how's this for simple? Just turn the heat on high and let the soup come up to the simmer. And while it's coming up to the simmer, put in 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then cover it partially. You never want to cover it fully because you want a little bit of air to get in there. Otherwise, it might boil over. That'll take about 20 to 30 minutes until the vegetables are tender. Ooh, that really smells good. There's nothing like leeks, I think. And you can serve this just as it is, because the vegetables are all tender. But I think it's much nicer to puree it, and I'm going to do that in a vegetable mill. I'm pouring that through so the solids are kind of strained. And then I'll start doing a little bit of that, but I'm going to put it over on this pot. And then I'm keeping liquid behind because that helps the solids go through. But this is nice and tender, so it's going through nicely. But remember this trick if you're using a mill, to keep a little liquid, as it just makes it go faster. The good thing about a vegetable mill is that it holds back any strings if you have a tough vegetable like asparagus. So there, that's all through, and let's have a little taste of that. Oh, that's a lovely thick puree. That is good. Now you can serve it just as it is in a bowl with a dollop of sour cream, or you can put in the milk in it, or you can just cream it up. Stir that all up. And serve that either hot or cold. And if it's cold, it's a Vichyssoise. That's all a Vichyssoise is, just chilled leek and potato soup with cream. Here's another way to use this leek and potato base. There you have your vegetables just about tender. Take a handful of watercress, washed, stems and all. Just put it in the soup there and let that cook for 5 minutes. After it's cooked, drain it. Puree the solids. Pour the puree back into the liquid and serve it hot or cold with or without cream. And still another variation on a leek and potato or onion and potato base. Kitchen treasures such as cooked turnips. In they go. I found these in my fridge, a little bit of cauliflower, in that goes, and here's a bit of grated carrot. Put in anything you think might go well. Simmer that up for a few minutes. Puree it as before, and you know what that's called? Soup du jour, today's soup. One base, 4 variations, but there are dozens more. Chicken stock. It's one of the fundamentals of good cooking. You use it in sauces, soups, gravies, braised meats, braised vegetables. Of course, you can buy it in a can, but you never know what's in the can. So I think it's much better to make your own. And you can use necks. There's some trimmings from chicken breasts. I don't use skin. Sometimes that has a kind of fishy taste. There's a bit of gizzard and a heart. You don't use the liver because that gives a funny taste sometimes. And here I have a whole bunch of just trimmings, some raw and some cooked, and I've just put them in the freezer. That's a good thing to do. Keep it in the freezer till you're ready to make a batch. Then put in a little bit of salt, not too much. That's about 2 teaspoons full. Be sure that you have enough water to cover it. And bring it to the simmer. Now look, that's just come to the simmer, and look what's happened. Look at that awful looking scum on the top. You just have to take that off. It'll take you a minute or so, and then push all the chicken down and do it again. And then cover it partially and simmer it for an hour. Now after it's simmered for an hour or two, strain it. And then you want to degrease it. And the easiest way to degrease it, if you've got plenty of time, is to chill it in the refrigerator. Now, after several hours or overnight, when it's thoroughly chilled, all you need to do is scrape this congealed fat off the top. I'm using just a great big rubber spatula. See how easy that is? There you are, your own homemade chicken stock. Couldn't be easier. One of my favorite chicken soups because it's really low cal, but it's absolutely delicious, and you can serve it to company. I've got 2 quarts of chicken stock in here. There goes in the bay leaf. And then I'd like to have a little bit of wine, but you don't have to have it, just about half a cup of dry white vermouth there. And then here is my chicken. I've just got some boneless, skinless chicken breasts in there that are raw. They're going to poach in the soup. And then I'm going to put a julienne of vegetables, just a little handful. That's celery. And I've got a little bit of white of leek and a little bit of onion and a little bit of carrot. And I'm going to let that cook for about 4 minutes. Now, 4 minutes are up. I just want to test that chicken. I don't want it to overcook. It could just have the slightest bit of springiness, showing that they're just done but not overdone. And take the chicken out and then let the vegetables cook 8 or 9 minutes more until they're tender. In the few minutes it's taken to cook the vegetables, I've julienned the chicken breasts to match the shape of the vegetables. In they go to warm up in the soup. Then you want to taste that very, very carefully for seasoning. I'm going to put just a little more salt. I think it needs that. It's better to salt less at first than more. And that soup is now ready to serve. Now, here's a variation on this clear chicken soup with a julienne of vegetables. This one is exactly the same, but rather than julienne the vegetables, I have diced them. And now I'm putting in the chicken, and I've diced the chicken breasts, and now I'm going to turn it into a cream of chicken soup. And now I'm going to drain out a little of this nice chicken stock. And I'm going to put it into my blender, in which I've got 3 cups of thoroughly cooked tender rice. And I'm going to puree it, and that's going to thicken the soup. There. That's nicely pureed. It goes back into my chicken soup. And there you have cream of chicken soup. But there's not a smidgen of cream in it. You can serve it just as it is, but I think I'm going to add a little garniture to it. Shortly before serving now, heat it up with 1 cup of cooked green peas and 1 cucumber cut into julienne. And by the time that's heated up, the cucumbers will be done. And taste that very, very carefully for seasoning, and it's ready to serve. Here's another good soup made with chicken stock. This is going to be a cream of mushroom soup. It starts out with half a cup of minced onions cooked slowly in 4 tablespoons of butter until they're nice and tender. And then in goes 3 tablespoons of flour. So that's a 1 heaping tablespoon. That means that's 1 tablespoon, and there's a level tablespoon. And that must cook slowly together until it froths and foams without coloring. That takes about 2-3 minutes. Then after it's cooked for 2 minutes, take it off the heat, and when the bubbling is stopped, pour in about half a cup of hot chicken stock and stir that all around. This is the thickening for your soup. In that last chicken soup we made, we had rice thickening, and this is the classical roux, or flour and butter thickening. Then when that's nicely blended, set it over heat and let it simmer for 2 minutes. See, that's really a thick sauce. That's really a velouté sauce. And now I'm going to add 1 whole quart of milk. And a little bit of tarragon, which goes very dried tarragon, which goes very nicely with mushrooms. And then let that simmer very slowly and prepare the mushrooms. Now here in my crusty machine, I've minced up a quart of raw mushrooms, and they're going to go into my soup base. Now here's a good thing to know about this, is that if I was going to make cream of carrot soup, I'd proceed in exactly the same way, except the carrots have been cooked. Or spinach soup, the spinach has been blanched just in boiling water. Or broccoli soup, the broccoli has just been very lightly cooked. Or asparagus soup. In fact, many kind of vegetable soups made just this way, cooked first. In the case of asparagus or broccoli, you'd save a little bit of the tip or of the flowers as a decoration afterwards. So whichever of these vegetables you use, they've just been blanched. That means very lightly, barely cooked. Then they're chopped up in the machine, and they go into the soup base just as these mushrooms are going to go into. But the mushrooms are raw. And in they go. Then they're to be simmered for 15 to 20 minutes. Well, now that's had it's about 20 minutes now, and it ought to be perfectly lovely. What's nice about the long simmer is it infuses the mushroom taste all through it. That is lovely. It hasn't had much seasoning. I'm going to put in a little more salt and a little white pepper. And then very often with a soup like this, a little lemon will perk it up. And you can serve it just as it is now, or if you want even more perkiness and deliciousness, put in a little cream. I'm going to put in just about a quarter of a cup there. How much to put in depends on you. That's now ready to serve. Look at these 4 beautiful soups. That's what you can do with a really good chicken stock. For the very same reasons it's a good idea to make your own chicken stock, it's a great idea to make your own beef stock. You know exactly what's in it, and it's perfectly delicious. Go to the supermarket and get yourself some meaty bones. There's a shank, here's some oxtail, a few other miscellaneous bones, and a big chopped onion, and a carrot, and I'm going to make a brown stock, so I've got to brown these in the oven. So in they go into a 450-degree oven, and about every 15 minutes turn and baste them, and in about half an hour they'll be nice and brown. Now, after your bones and vegetables have nicely browned like this, spoon out excess fat, and then dump the contents into a big pot. You see, there's still some nice brown stuff stuck to the bottom of the pan. So pour in some boiling water and scrape that up. This is very important because this is what is known as kitchen treasure. There's lots of little flavor in those coagulated juices. Now there, that's all loose and that's got marvelous flavor in it, and besides, it helps you clean the pan. Then in that goes into your kettle, and now over to the sink to get some water. I want enough to cover it by about 2 inches, and I'm also going to put in these aromatic vegetables. I've got a chopped tomato there, just whole, not even seeded, and there's 2 small carrots quartered, a bit of celery, an onion all chopped. This is an herb bouquet. It's got a bay leaf and some thyme and parsley in it. That's tied up so the herbs won't be floating around in the soup. There, now that's ready to go back on the stove. Now set that over high heat, bring it up to the simmer, and then skim it. It's going to be just like the chicken stock with a lot of scum on the top. Then maintain it over the simmer for 4 or 5 hours to get all the good out of those bones. Cover it partially. Now that's about cooked enough, I would say. Now strain it. Look at that beautiful color there. And make sure you've pressed all the juices out of everything. And now, degrease it, just as we did for the chicken stock. Now you've got this wonderful homemade beef stock, you're in the position to make some marvelous soups. One of the best, I think, is beef and vegetable. I have in here a cup each of carrots, onions, leeks, and celery, and I've just lightly sauteed them in butter. It just seems to give them a better taste. And then in goes 2 quarts of beef stock and about a cup of turnips. They don't get sauteed, so they don't need it. And then I'm going to put in some of this orzo stuff, which is, rice-shaped pasta. I'll put in about exactly 1/2 cup of that, and then let that simmer for 10 minutes until the pasta orzo is tender. There, that orzo is perfectly tender. Now I'm going to have a little taste of that. That's delicious. That's really beautifully seasoned, ready to serve, except I'm going to put in a little garnish. There's some of the meat that come out of that stock, those bones that we cooked up. And then here for color are some green leaves of cabbage, which I just blanched very lightly. And again for color, there's a little bit of peeled, chopped, diced tomato, just a little handful there. Just let that warm up, and there you are, ready to serve. Another marvelous soup you can make with your own homemade beef stock is French onion soup. And here I've got about 7 cups of sliced onions, and I'm cooking them very slowly until they're tender in 1 tablespoon of oil and 3 tablespoons of butter. Now those are tender, and I want them to brown. And to help them brown, I'm going to put in about a 1/2 teaspoon of sugar, then for flavor, a little salt. And then you've got to stand over them and stir fairly regularly for about 1/2 hour until they brown. How about that for a change when you think of how many onions we started with? Those are nicely brown now. And now I want a little flour in there because we want to have a slight thickening to the soup. So I have about 2 tablespoons of flour, and you want to stir that around for about 2 minutes. There, after that flour is cooked 2 or 3 minutes, here's some of your beautiful homemade beef stock. Ladle in about 2 cups of that off heat. Stir that around to make sure that it'll blend with the flour. And then if you want, put in 4 or 5 tablespoons of good cognac, and then about a cup of wine. That's, I always use French vermouth. Stir that around, and then ladle in the rest of your beef stock. I had about 2.5 quarts there. And then you want to bring that up to the simmer and simmer it for 30 minutes. Here There's my onion soup all done and beautiful, and a very easy way to serve it is put a toasted piece of French bread in the bottom of a soup bowl and some grated Swiss cheese and just ladle the soup on there. That's easy and delicious. But here's the classic onion, gratinéed onion soup, which I have croutons in the bottom of the dish, sliced cheese on top of that, and the soup goes over. This is an oven-proof dish, by the way, because it's going to bake. There we are. Now I'm going to finish it with another layer of croutons. Now the final crouton on this. And this is our own French bread, so it doesn't sink to the bottom. And now I'm covering this with grated Swiss cheese, and then it's going to go into the oven, a 425 oven, and bake for 20 to 30 minutes until the top is nicely browned. One great stock, two great soups, and that's just the beginning. You can buy beef stock in a can and chicken stock in a can, but if your recipe calls for fish stock, you can't buy it. You're going to make it yourself. The only hard thing about it is to find the fish frame that you need for it. That's a fish, all the fillets have been taken off, and this is the skeleton. And what you want is lean fish like sole or like cod. You don't want fatty fish like salmon or tuna because that'll give you an oily stock. You probably have to order the frame, and you want to be sure that these are the gills. You have to cut them out. They act like a sieve, and who knows what's left in it. Could be bitter. Out that goes. All the rest is used, including the head. So what you do is chop that up, pung, and in that goes into your pot. That's the head. Then chop up the rest, and all you need to do is to cover that with water and bring it to the boil. Now, this has been cooking for 30 minutes and it's done. And just like with the chicken stock, as it came up to the simmer, it produced a lot of gray, awful scum. You keep on skimming it every now and then because it produces a little bit more. And the water was lightly salted, but don't cook it any longer than 30 minutes. And it's now ready to be strained. There's your fish stock all strained out. It's really wonderfully valuable stuff to have, and if you don't use it all, you can freeze it and have it on hand for something wonderful like a Mediterranean fish soup, which I'm going to make now. I have in here a cup each of sliced onions and sliced leeks, or you could use 2 cups of sliced onions, and they're cooking in a third to a half cup of good fruity olive oil. This is a very Mediterranean dish. Now I've got 2 or 3 large cloves of garlic chopped up. And then I have about 3 cups of chopped, seeded, peeled tomatoes. And because I want a good tomato paste, a good tomato flavor, I'm going to put in some tomato paste. That is up to the flavor of the tomatoes. Now I'm going to put in very typical Mediterranean flavorings. That's dried orange peel, which you can just make yourself. And here's a bit of thyme, fragrant dried thyme. I'm going to put in about half a teaspoonful. Now this is something, fennel seeds. That's a very Mediterranean flavor, slightly licorice flavor. That's about half a teaspoon in there. Now I'm just going to let that cook down slowly for about 5 minutes. Now that's been 5 or 6 minutes, and you see the juices have come out of the tomatoes. The reason for all this pre-cooking is it just gives things more flavor. And now I'm going to put in some saffron. This is little saffron flowers. It's very, very expensive. They come from crocuses, and I don't know why it's so expensive, but I'm just going to put it in anyway. You can leave it out if you don't want to spend that much money. It's just a little pinch in there. Don't put in too much or it'll taste like medicine. And now, here goes our fish stock. That's about 2 quarts. And then you just let that simmer for 20 to 30 minutes. Now, while that soup base is simmering, I'm going to make the traditional garnish called a rouille, or a red garlic sauce. And you really got to love garlic to like this. But it is marvelous. And you start out, if you like, with 1 clove of garlic per person. I'm just using 5 rather than 8. And then this garlic has to be completely mashed into a puree, so put in a little bit of salt there and use anything that you have handy to pound it with. You notice I have my bowl on a pot holder so I won't crack the bowl. But this is very, very important that you have a complete puree here. And now some basil. If you have fresh basil, that's wonderful to have. If not, use another herb, a dried one. And now I'm going to have a little bit of breadcrumbs, and the breadcrumbs are going to act as a thickener. And to make them mash up, I'm going to put in a little bit of canned pimento, and to give it a little flavor, 3-4 squirts of Tabasco. Now I'm going to put in 2 egg yolks. This is all in the interest of mashing things into a paste. And now I'm going to start, little by little, adding some very good fruity olive oil. The rest of it is just like making a mayonnaise. After a little bit it's gone in and I've pounded more, I'm going to switch to my electric mixer, which I think I can now do. Now, here's the electric mixer. I'm putting in about a cup of olive oil here, very, very slowly. It's got to be good and thick. Now that should be enough. Now I think I'd better taste that. Nothing wrong with that. That's all ready to go into my soup. Now look at this. My soup base was simmering for 30 minutes. I've very carefully seasoned it so it's perfect. Now I brought it to the rolling boil because I'm going to add my fish. And with this, you can add all of one kind of fish or a mixture of fish, which will be very nice. Or some flimsy fish that will break up and thicken the soup, and some firmer fish. What I happen to have is 2 firm fishes. I have here some monkfish cut into chunks and some cod, and all they go in together. And then it's to come up to the boil again, and then it only takes 2 or 3 minutes to cook. You just don't want to overcook it. You see, that's awfully quick. This is just coming up to the simmer and the fish is already done. You can tell by poking it. It just has a little bit of consistency. It's turned opaque. That is done and ready to serve. It's just going to be delicious. Now to serve, put 2 rounds of toasted French bread in wide soup plates and slather them with that Rouille, the red garlic sauce, and then ladle a big bunch of fish and sauce into the soup plate. Oh my, that smells good. And then put on a little bit of parsley and sprinkle on with a little bit of grated Parmesan cheese. That's really a meal in itself. If you're lucky enough to have a little of this red garlic sauce, this Rouille left over from your fish soup, it goes marvelously with pasta. Here's how. Here's some fresh noodles, and I'm putting a little bit of olive oil on there, and some salt and pepper. I always like to do this first with the pasta because it sort of gets it all ready and the sauce doesn't stick to it too much. And then here goes the Rouille. Oh, you'll just love this because it gives it so much flavor. You could eat it just like that, but it's awfully nice. I'm going to put in a little green peppers and red peppers and toss that up a bit more. And then toss in a little grated Parmesan cheese. How's that for a wonderful dinner? You know, in my grandmother's time in the wilds of northern Illinois during the wintertime, there wasn't any salad at all. You just had cabbage. But look at everything we have now. Curly endive, escarole, Boston lettuce, romaine. You just have everything your heart can desire. But you do have to pay some attention to it. Wash it thoroughly. There's nothing worse than a sandy salad. And then get yourself one of these salad whirligigs that dries the lettuce. They just work wonderfully. And the second worst thing is having a wet salad. And then you want to, if you're going to preserve it a bit, layer it out. If in your refrigerator you have your crisper drawer, just layer it on paper towels. I've got another layer there. And that keeps it dry but crisp and slightly humid. If you don't have room for that, layer it in a plastic bag with paper towels. When you've taken all that trouble over your greens and gotten beautiful ones, you want a perfectly beautiful salad dressing to go with them. Something that will really complement those delicate tastes. Here's the way I like to make mine. I put in a little bit of, about a half teaspoon of chopped shallots or scallions, and then just a little bit of that Dijon type mustard, and then a bit of salt, and some fresh lemon. I think it's terribly important in these dressings that every element be absolutely of the highest quality. Beat that up, and then I'm going to put in a little, I like French wine vinegar. I think you can use the wrong kind of vinegar. You can ruin things. They're just sort of droplets in there. And then very, very good oil, whatever you use. I'm using a very light virgin olive oil, and I just started by droplets at first. The quality of oil is of utmost importance. Sometimes you go out in public and you order a beautiful salad and they've used machine oil or frying oil or something that's just inedible. And the proportions, I think you've got to be very careful. You don't want too much vinegar. I use about 1 vinegar to 4 or 5 oil. But after you think you've got about enough in, then taste it very carefully for seasoning and see how it is. You can always add a little more vinegar, a little more salt. I didn't put any pepper. I'm going to put some in now. And that, to me, is a perfect little dressing. Now, I've got my salad greens on nice and crisp, and I'm just tearing it up a little bit so that they'll be in bite-sized pieces just before dressing it. There's my little dressing there. Stir that all up. And you don't want to coat the leaves. You don't never want to drown it. I think that can really have the rest of it. See, this salad will serve about 4 people with big salad appetites. There, that's all there is to a tossed green salad. Serve it immediately. How about another classic salad, the Niçoise? I have this nice platter lined with well-washed lettuce leaves. Now I have some boiled potatoes, and I'm putting a little bit of my vinaigrette on this. This is a salad in which you have a number of elements, and each one is seasoned separately. Make sure those are beautifully seasoned, and in they go into the bottom of our bowl. And then I have freshly, beautifully done green beans, again a few shallots, and a little bit of seasoning. Be very careful with this vinaigrette that you don't dress that ahead of time, because the beans lose their color. I'm going to put those at strategic intervals. Now some nice fresh tomatoes. These again are seasoned. Some people make these salad and put it all together and then toss it around, and it ends up looking like dog food. You should have a poem of an arrangement. Now a bit of canned tuna fish. That's a very Mediterranean element. Now some hard-boiled eggs. Now, an anchovy on each egg. Now I'm going to put a little bit more of my vinaigrette dressing over all just to make sure we have enough, but not too much. And then we have some nice, this little cute little olives from Nice or Italy. They're all the same. They're very nice little olives. And then a few capers. You can't have a Provençal dish without capers in it. And then a bit of parsley overall, and she's ready to serve. How about that? Salad niçoise is a classic example of a composed salad, meaning something that's been arranged. Here's another one, a pasta salad using those corkscrew-shaped pastas with dark accents of olives, red pimento, a little greenery of peas and broccoli. That's a lovely salad. And then here's a very chic little first course arrangement. Breast of pheasant bathed in vinaigrette with little segments of orange, onion rings, and frizzy lettuce, plus toasted pine nuts. Actually, the art of the composed salad is infinite. How about a deluxe chicken salad? You know, I think one of the great tricks in making a chicken salad is to toss the chicken meat in seasonings and flavorings and let it macerate for 20 minutes or so. And then when you fold in the mayonnaise, you've got a marvelous taste to it. And one reason I'm calling this deluxe is because I've got nice big pieces here. None of that little dice. I poached this purposely just for the salad, and I've cut it up nicely. And now here's the flavoring. I want to have salt and pepper, and then some lemon juice. I've squeezed out some here, and I can add a little more if we don't have enough. I've got about 6 cups of chicken in there, and that was about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And there's some parsley. And then I happen to have a little fresh tarragon here. I'm just going to snip that in. A lovely fresh herb makes an awfully nice flavoring. Tarragon's fairly strong, so I won't put in too much. Then a little bit of very fine oil. I always use a very good olive oil, which is really virgin or extra virgin. And then about half a cup of chopped onion, that happens to be red onion, and about a cup of diced celery. And just for fun, some walnuts. That's about a cup of walnuts. And then toss that all up and come back and taste it and add any more flavoring you think is necessary and let it sit for at least 20 minutes. I always refrigerate everything, even if it's only for 20 minutes. I think it's a very good habit to get into. So here's our salad, and you want to taste it very, very carefully at this point. You want to make sure there's plenty of salt and everything else in it. That's good, but this should be perfect at this point so that you could even serve it right now. But I'm going to put in some mayonnaise. And you want just enough mayonnaise to enrobe it. That's probably 2/3 of a cup, but we'll just see. There, now that's just nicely enrobed and not too much mayonnaise. Homemade mayonnaise, by the way. And it's ready now to be arranged on a platter. Here's our chicken salad all nicely arranged with a necklace of watercress, a little extra mayonnaise for those that love homemade stuff. And here's a lobster salad arranged in an avocado half, and that's done exactly in the same method of the maceration first to give it extra flavor. It's that maceration that makes all the difference. Here I have boiling away the makings for the great American potato salad. When you make a potato salad, make sure that you use boiling potatoes that will hold their shape. Don't use bakers, or you will be sorry because they'll come apart. And what I've got here, these are potatoes in slices, boiling in lightly salted water for just a few minutes, and taste them. And as soon as they're just tender, drain them. And just drain that out completely. And then the next step, which is very important, is let them sit covered for 3 or 4 minutes, and that will firm them up. Now, presumably they have firmed up a little bit, and I'm dumping them into a great big mixing bowl. And they need a preliminary flavoring. This is just like our chicken salad. That's salt, pepper, and about half a cup of minced onions. Now this may seem very strange to you, but I'm adding on a little more liquid. And the reason for that is you want the potatoes to, the pores of the potatoes to absorb liquid so they're not going to drink up all the oil in the mayonnaise. So let them sit that way for about 15 minutes, tossing them up 2 or 3 times, and then you're ready to continue. Now those potatoes have absorbed all that liquid. And it was good having them hot first because they get much more flavor. And now we have the final flavoring, which is just what I like. I've got a big chopped dill pickle, 3 or 4 chopped hard-boiled eggs, a bit of 3 or 4 ribs of celery, and here's some crisp bacon that's been chopped up, and 3 or 4 tablespoons of parsley. And then you want to toss that up really very gently, and then taste it very, very carefully for seasoning, having enough salt and pepper and so forth in it. And then when it's cool enough, and this is now, you want to put in just enough homemade mayonnaise to enrobe the potatoes. Not too much. You can always pass some mayonnaise separately. And I think it's a good idea to get the potato salad done ahead and refrigerate it for even a day, because it firms up the potatoes and they absorb the flavoring. Here's another great American classic, coleslaw. I think it's very important when you make it that it be very, very finely shredded, and the knife really does the best job. So here's how we go about it. In this bowl here, I have a teaspoon and a half of salt and a teaspoon of sugar and 3 tablespoons of vinegar, and I'm putting in a little bit of this Dijon type mustard, stirring that all around. And now in goes the cabbage. I've got 4 cups of finely shredded cabbage, and just for fun, about a cup of shredded red cabbage, and 2 or 3 tablespoons of parsley, and some grated carrot, that's about half a cup, and about half a cup of diced green pepper, and some scallions, 2 or 3 minced scallions. There's a cucumber peeled, seeded, juiced, and diced. And there's about 2/3 of a cup of celery. And then there's a whole little sour apple. And then a nice touch is about half a teaspoon of caraway seeds. And then you toss that all up. And this, like the other things, should macerate for quite a while because that tenderizes the cabbage and gets the flavors all through. So you want to come back and toss that several times for at least 20 minutes. And correct seasoning. It may need a little salt, a little pepper. I like to serve this just as is because it's a wonderful no-cal salad, and then pass mayonnaise separately. There you are, 2 utterly and completely American treasures at their best. Potato salad and coleslaw. Let's make some French bread. It's delicious to eat, and you can't buy any that's any good, so if you want it, you've got to make it yourself. You start out with some yeast. There's 1 package of dry active yeast, and it goes into a cup. You want a 1/3 cup of tepid water, and what you want to do is to prove that it's active, because that's what's going to make the bread rise. And to help it prove, I'm going to put a little pinch of sugar. Stir it around, and in 5 minutes, you'll see what I mean by proved yeast. Look at that now. That's puffed up and foamed. Some people call that proofing, but I call it proving because the yeast has proved to me that it's alive and well and ready to go to work. And so now we can start in on the bread. What you want now is to get bread flour, and look for that in a supermarket or a health food store. And I have in my machine, which I like for preliminary mixing, 3½ cups of this flour and 1 tablespoon of rye flour for texture. And I'm going to add 2¼ teaspoons of salt. And now we're about to go. So I'm going to turn the processor on. In goes the yeast. Then in goes 1 cup of water, washing out the yeast cup. Now you turn off the machine and let it rest because you want the flour particles to absorb the liquid, and that makes for faster and better kneading. Now's the time to take a look at it. And you notice I'm using the plastic blade there because that doesn't heat up the dough too much. And take a feel of it. It should be fairly dry. If it's too wet, put in some more flour. If it's too dry, add a few drops of water. And now, second part of the kneading is I want about 30 revolutions. 1, 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. I can put on a little bit of flour in there. If it doesn't grow, put in a little flour. There, I'm going to consider that enough. There. You have to kind of do it, run with the punches on this. Now out it comes, and it has to have another rest. Now that's rested for 2 minutes, so I'm doing the final kneading by hand. You go wham and be very rough with it. It needs about 40 or 50 kneadings. It just depends on how it feels. But I like the final hand kneading because it gives you a feel for the dough, and you know that it's perfectly smooth and well done. And you're rough with it. Let's look at that now. See, I can turn it in my hands and it doesn't break. And it looks very smooth and nice. I would consider that done. And what you're doing are kneading all the gluten particles so that they form together in a kind of a web. And that's what allows the dough to rise. So into an ungreased bowl, you want the dough to have a grip so that it can rise up. And then cover that with plastic. And a towel. Now what I do on a cold day to keep it warm is to put it in the oven, but all I do, I turn the oven on to warm for 30 seconds, counting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 29,000, 30 seconds. Turn the oven off, and there is just a noticeable warmth in there. So just set that in there and leave it for 40 minutes. Now let's see what that's done after 40 minutes. I don't know that this is really 75 to 80 degrees, but it has worked before, and it has worked again. You see, that's just started to rise. That's just what we want. And now, out onto your work surface. And just always have it very lightly floured. Now this is going to seem ridiculous, but you want to deflate it at this point. So spread it out, and really rough and tough with it. And fold it in 3, and turn it over, and do the same thing again. The reason for this, it redistributes the yeast. This is going to give you a strong second rise. Back it goes into the bowl, and gets covered with plastic and a towel. And then you want to put that back in your draft-free place for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours until it is almost tripled in volume. So I'm going to set the timer for 90 minutes. Now that's been a little over 1.5 hours, and look and see that has risen up, and that is almost tripled in volume. And so out it comes. Now cut it in half, and I'm going to turn one half into a long loaf, and I'll reserve the other half and cover it with my bit of plastic wrap. And now for the long loaf, you first start it out with it in half, a piece in half, and then you flatten it out. And notice that you're really quite rough with this, and this all seems to help with the yeast. Now fold it in half and then bang it hard, trying to make this as even as possible. Then, that's where your fold is. You make a trench in that and fold that in half. I'm going to very lightly flour this. I don't want it to stick. And what you're doing here, you're creating surface tension, which, as you see, it's going to hold the bread in shape. Now we've got this shape. Now take your flat of your two hands and begin rolling them out. You see I'm extending the loaf, extending the shape, and that at the ends you roll it rather thin, and that gives you your pointed ends, and you don't want to roll it out longer than your oven tray. I think that's just about right. And that's, see if you can find where the seam is. Well, that seems to have seamed pretty well together. If I always pinch anything together that I see, just to make sure everything is going to hold. And then I've got a floured towel here. And I'm going to lay that on seam side up. And then I'm going to make a little trench here, and then form your other piece of dough in the same way. There's another piece of dough, and here's how to turn it into a round loaf. You start out by folding the edges up together, and what you're doing is making a cushion shape. And again, what you're tremendously interested in is surface tension, because the gluten forms a cloak around the outside of the bread. Now here, that is a cushion shape. Now, to make it even more so, you take your hands like this and push underneath as you turn it around. You can really see that there's a tension that's pulling it into the round shape. And then turn that over, and I always call this a little pucker under here. Pinch that together, and that goes onto a floured towel. Sprinkle a little flour on so nothing will, so it won't stick, and then cover that loosely with a towel and let that rise. Here's another variation, little hard rolls. This time it's the same dough, but I've added 2 tablespoons of rye flour just to give it a little more country texture and color. Pinch that, and that goes on a floured towel. Cover it, and let them rise about an hour and a half or so until almost tripled in volume, and they'll be ready to bake. You know, the oven is critical in baking French bread like this. I'm preheating it to 450 degrees, and because the bread is not baking in a pan, I have lined this rack on the lower third of the oven with quarry tiles. These things you can buy at a building supply, or use a pizza stone, because the bread is going to slide onto these tiles, and that's how it's going to bake. So do that 20 to 30 minutes before you plan to bake the bread. Now, there's my bread, ready and risen, but I've got to get it from the towel onto this board. This is just an old drawer bottom that I used to slide it onto those hot bricks. And this is another board that I'm going to unmold it with, and this is sprinkled lightly with cornmeal so nothing will stick. So there she goes. You know, this is a soft underbelly, because the top of it is always crusted a little bit. You want the soft underbelly so that you can slash it. Now you have a razor, and almost parallel you slash with sure strokes. As you see how that opens up. And this makes a beautiful decorative pattern, and it also allows the bread to rise a little more. Now that's ready for the oven. Now, as soon as it's slashed, you want to slide that into your preheated oven. You see, you just pull it away like that. And then you need to have some steam in the oven. That's a squirter. You notice I didn't squirt the bread itself. I was squirting the bottom of the oven and the bottom sides to create steam. And the steam helps the bread rise more in the oven, and it also helps form and crisp and brown the crust. I'm going to squirt it a little bit more, and then I'm going to do that again in 2 minutes and leave the bread in for 20 to 25 minutes in all. Now that's been in about 20 minutes. And that certainly looks done, doesn't it? It's nice and brown, it thumps. But it probably isn't quite done, because it should feel light. So I'm going to turn off the oven and leave it in there another 10 minutes, because if it isn't quite done, the moisture from the inside comes out and softens the crust. I think it's better to have it a little more done than a little underdone. Look at all that bread. Was it worth all that trouble? You'll be the judge. Well, I hope you've enjoyed soup, salads, and bread, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this 6-part series we call The Way to Cook. This is Junior Child. Bon appetit.